All right, we're going to get going. So you guys are lucky because, well, let me start off. My name is Brian Caudle. I am here with Mr. Orin Day to my immediate right, and next to him is Scott Melchionda.
Wow, yes.
All right, thank you. And these guys were back at the Data East / Sega days back in the early to mid 90s, and please correct me if I'm wrong.
That's about right.
And I've met with these guys a few times in the last week or so, and there are some incredible stories. And that's why I think you guys are lucky. We got some slides that Orin put together that we can talk through, and just some of the stuff he told me is unbelievable. But just to give a couple of examples of some of the work these guys worked together on would be Guns N' Roses, Maverick, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Baywatch, and Apollo 13. I mean, there's, and Orin, you were on Star Wars Trilogy,
Yep.
X-Files, Starship Troopers, which he actually brought, and I'm not going to give it all away yet, but it's like good show and tell up here. So like I said, you guys are lucky. So we'll get started, and again, with this crowd, we're just going to play it by ear and just see how it goes. But I think the best way to start it is, guys, and Orin, please, how did you guys get started in pinball? Because, again, you got a great place you started before you came into pinball, so please go through that.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that, are we working here? You guys here okay? Okay. So it was funny, I started to get into pinball when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and it was mechanical games. We went on vacation, and there was a place that had a volley and a super soccer. And it was great because there was some kid there with the super soccer that, that has the bonus countdown up in the back with little balls. And this kid had a magnet so he could hold the scoring switch back and it would just ding, 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 ding. And so he would ring up 20 or 30 credits and we would just play for free all day long. So it was a blast. And so it was funny. Came back to Chicago, and of course, you're 7 or 8 years old. Mom's not going to take you to an arcade. Oh my gosh, the arcade, the bowling alley, it's all full of perverts that want to grab kids. So, I finally got to be old enough to go to birthday parties and stuff like that. And by then, it was like the Bally solid state era. And there was no bigger turnoff to me than to walk up to Centaur or Fathom or one of those games and have 20-second ball times. And it's like, oh my God, I put in a quarter and I played this game and it was over in a minute. So for a long time, I didn't play any pinball at all. And I was playing stuff like we would go on the, buy $20 and get 8 tokens for $1. We played Super Sprint with 3 people. With the 3 steering wheel game, we would go in and fill up a jug full of tokens and play it for 5 or 6 hours and then stagger out of there at 4 in the afternoon like it was midnight. But I went to college and then I started to encounter games, the Williams System 11 games, stuff like Cyclone and Space Station, and then some of the early Data East games like Data East Batman and Star Trek, and then games like Gilligan's Island and Adams came along, and I was hooked. So I was at school at Duke. That's where I played. They had a wonderful arcade. It's gone now, just like many arcades. And played there, and then was in grad school. And then I decided, well, I didn't really want to get a PhD in physics because I could work on it for 7 years and then get no job. So I got a job up in D.C. Working at NASA, and I worked there as a programmer for 2 years. And some of the guys that I worked with were the people up there that started the Free State Pinball Association. They did that about a year after I left. But I got on the internet and I met a bunch of the early Data East people. And Lyman Sheets had gotten a job going from being a programmer somewhere in Virginia, like Norfolk or something like that, to Data East, and they said, oh, we want to hire, he did really well there, and he's like, well, there's other people that are out there that are, these internet pinball nerds that, can write code, but they also love pinball. So I ended up getting an interview with those guys. I did sort of this weird side trip that when Tommy was coming out, the Who's Tommy Pinball, they did a game launch party, and it was probably like the first game launch party that Data East had ever done in Dallas. They had 10 prototype Tommy pinball machines at Hard Rock Cafe, and they said, well, we need a pinball player who can come and do it. So I went from D.C. all the way to Dallas to meet these guys and do it, because Lyman was playing in a pinball tournament in Spain or something like that, some kind of trade show or something. He was already occupied, and so their ringer wasn't there. So I'm not nearly as good as Lyman, but I went anyway and got to know these guys, and they called me up like a month later and said, we're going to add a position. And it was funny that as soon as they decided to add a position, somebody else there quit, so there were 2 positions. So in the same week, they hired me and Kevin Martin, who, if you don't know Kevin Martin, he runs Papa. And with December of 1993, right before Christmas, we both started there. It led to a great career.
Scott, how about you?
I don't have quite as. Can you hear me? So, I don't have quite as an extensive storytelling about my childhood video game and pinball experience. I always enjoyed them a lot. Hampton Beach, New Hampshire. We'd vacation there in the summer, and they had, 3-4 huge arcades. And it was a little weird today. I got here a little while ago, and I'm here with my girlfriend, and I was playing Asteroids and actually not doing bad at it, and I've got a girlfriend, and I was like, man, something's not quite fitting here. But no, I used to love going. I'd blow a lot of money on Asteroids and Gauntlet 2. Elf is dying. Is that the line?
I'm sorry?
From no, I was talking to you.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Elf needs food.
Needs food
badly.
But I went to Mass Art in Boston for college, and I took painting and printmaking, and I fell in with a bunch of people who were really into the Commodore Amiga. Anybody know what that is? 2-3. That's pretty good. And I started getting really into an application called Deluxe Paint, which is like just terrific. What the kids today call pixel animation. Back then it was just animation. And I did a lot of little short animated subjects for my classwork, and also I got some freelance work out of that. And we moved, my then fiance and I, we moved to Chicago. She was going to grad school. I needed to find a job. So I started sending this video cassette. Anyone? Video cassettes? I sent that out, and I saw an ad in the newspaper. I'm not going to keep calling back. Remember. And I sent the tape in, and I got the interview. I remember it was really snowy. I had a nice sweater and a shirt and these huge boots on. It was in Chicago, and it was really pretty mind-blowing. I went in, Joe Kamenko sat me down and said, we've had 200 applicants for this job, and you were my #1 pick. Wow. We really love your work.
And this was on the animation side, the dot matrix side?
Yes, yeah. So I had all these things I'd made in Deluxe Paint, and Deluxe Animator was the sequel to that. Electronic Arts made it, and it was running on DOS. I started, I think, they had to get approval from Japan, but I started like 3.5 weeks after, and it was great. I worked with Orin a lot here on it. I was being paid to play pinball as part of R&D. I mean, pretty sweet gig. Yep. And a crazy bunch of people.
Yeah, so
really funny.
Yeah. So when I started...
started like 4 months after you,
I think so.
It was like
February, like February,
Valentine's
March.
Day or something.
Yeah, because when I started, Tales from the Crypt was still in the factory. And that was... They probably made it for another 2 weeks after I started. Then they took a break, retooled the line, started building Tommy. And I think Tommy was just about done when you started with production. And then the next game that came up was WWF Royal Rumble.
Yeah.
And that was sort of I'm not going to say it was the beginning of the end for us as Data East, but we put that game out.
Was that the last Data East game?
No, they but
Guns N' Roses.
It went on for a little while, but we put that game out, and 5 days after it went in production, Hulk Hogan left WWF. So, and he was like right in the middle, right in the middle of the backlash. So then the next game that came out was Guns N' Roses, and you can see Scott there all the way at the left.
I'm the one holding my finger up.
The obligatory slash picture of everybody flipping the bird. We put out that game, and a week later, Guns N' Roses broke up. Then we did Maverick.
That didn't do too bad, though.
It did okay. The movie did okay. And then there was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which was critically acclaimed, which is pretty much Hollywood's code word for did not make any money. And at that point, it was the time for Data East to morph into Sega. And the real story behind that is the guy who owned us, who owned Data East, was, to put it politely, really in hock to the guy who owned Sega, that he had borrowed money from the guy a bunch of times, and to keep Data East going, because they had some fighting games out there, and were really doing okay with that. Like Fighter's History was a pretty good fighting game, that came before the Mortal 2, stuff like that. And Sega had the idea of world domination, that they wanted to have the best console games, the best deluxe games, the best stand-up video games. And we want to have a company that does pinball machines and novelty too. So then we could sell the whole line, and there could be an arcade that would have nothing but Sega stuff in it, and people would be happy and come and put money in there. And they didn't see the writing on the wall that the pinball industry was ready to die. And not because people didn't play pinball, but was because of all the diamond plate games, that we had then made 3 or 4 years of games that would never wear out. That the playfields wouldn't look like, if you look at, Jungle Lord and some of those other games that are in there, where the ball wears the paint off the playfield, and that's when the operator knows, oh, it's time to get a new game because my playfield's worn out. We put that automotive clear coat on there, diamond plate, whatever you want to call it, and the playfields still looked great 3 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later, 15 years later, and people didn't need to buy new games. And you go to Barcade now and you can see those 30-year-old games that Scott and I worked on.
Clunk.
And they still play great. Of course, there's a lot of people that have made repro parts to keep those games going. But, so, Sega sort of bought a turd there. In terms of this pinball company that that the numbers were, the numbers with Jurassic and games like that had been 10,000, 11,000, 12,000, Jurassic, Star Wars, whatever, and that's how they could sell it to Sega and say, oh yeah, here we are, give me one more loan and you can have it. And of course Sega got theirs by coming out with things like Saturn and Dreamcast that nobody wanted to program. So there weren't any titles, and they're sort of part of history now. And then once that decline had come to fruition, we had South Park, which was the last game I worked on as an employee there, and they hit on the great idea of, instead of being this monolithic business where we make one pinball game for 3 months and then we'll never ever make it again, they got this idea of, well, maybe we could make games that we could make 250 of or 500 of at a time, and we could stay in business that way. And Gary has turned that into a very successful business model where he can go back and, he can make more Metallica, he can make more Game of Thrones, he can make a Spider-Man Vault Edition, and have some variety there for operators, and, get some margin, and not have to worry about making 4 or 5 new games a year unless the market's supporting it. So,
and South Park, I think, was labeled as Stern at some point too, right? Was that at the transition from Sega to Stern?
That was when they went back and remade it. I think they did 7 different runs, which was remarkable at that time, because the only machines that had more than one run were Adams and Adams Gold, and 8-Ball Deluxe Limited Edition, and then there was another version of that. I think they did a 3rd version of it at some point.
Okay.
Well, you touched on a few of the games. One that you didn't mention that I've actually played at a local barcade near me in Raleigh is Baywatch. And in our discussions, there's Baywatch, there's Guns N' Roses, there's a lot of Easter eggs and special stuff that you guys, either programmed in to be seen or maybe not even be seen through flipper codes or, the one with Kevin as the sink Kevin or drowned Kevin character and all that.
Yeah, the Kevin Martin on the multi-ball restart in Baywatch. Yeah. That if you come back into multi-ball, you can drown Kevin by pressing the extra ball button during the the swimmers to rescue Kevin.
Yes.
And I think he gets replaced with a dolphin. That after he gets drowned, we should have made videos of some of this, but Scott and his bunch were really creative, and they did all sorts of silly things, and there were lots of silly things that didn't get into a game. So who here's played Goldeneye? So Goldeneye, James Bond game, and there's this scene at the beginning of the game where you got you have the gun sight, and it's focusing on James Bond, and if you squeeze the gun trigger while it's going like that, it'll actually shoot him.
Ooh.
And he'll do something funny. And there was this one that they, said, okay. I said, okay, guys, let's put something really funny in there. And so they sent me this deluxe paint animation over, and this is bringing it over probably on a 3.5-inch floppy disk, bringing it over. Bringing it over, walking it from one office to the other, and so they say, "Well, hey, take a look at this." So it's like they shoot James Bond, and his pants blow off, and then his dick comes down, and it unrolls like a fire hose all the way across the bottom of the screen.
Al, you can edit this, right?
That wasn't me.
I'm like, okay, we're not gonna give that to the Bond people. And I still have a copy of the animation, but of course it never got into the game.
We got to dig out those EPROMs.
But
Well, speaking of that, then, and you mentioned this, you still haven't told me the story, and obviously we can't show it, but the Guns N' Roses risque match.
go back.
Oh, yeah.
Am I jumping ahead too far?
No, it's okay. Well, it was on there.
Okay.
Do we want to go back one? Can we go back one? Is there magic?
Maybe roll it.
The back key?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
So
There
if you-
she is.
Yeah, if you see the gal in the middle, that's Sally Davis, who was another one of our dot artists who worked on quite a few games.
She started right when I did.
Yep.
A week after I did.
Yep. So we'd sort of ramped up our staff, and so we had this idea for the match.
It's my idea.
Scott's idea.
That's right.
Scott's idea.
Yeah, it's Guns N' Roses, and it's pretty crass, and it's pretty, it's always two things. So I said, why don't we have, it's Guns N' Roses, so for the match, we're going to have a girl take her top off, and the numbers are going to cover the party parts. And we got Sally to actually do it.
Yeah, it's Sally in a bodysuit.
Yeah,
and
she wore this skin-colored bodysuit.
And we had sort of like these two rooms that were like, there was one room that a few programmers were in, there was another room that the artists were in. There were sort of like these two bullpen type rooms. And Scott's like, oh, everybody's got to get out of there. And, so he was like filming it and doing did you use frame capture?
I was doing, it was the same way we capture stuff for the games. It would, yeah.
Okay, so you didn't use
still frames.
Still frames.
Yeah.
So you weren't using VHS for that.
No.
So, but anyway, he did
Sorry,
it.
Orin.
And so there's like two versions of it. There's the first version where she takes off her shirt, and then when her hands come down and the screen pans up, she's holding a big card that has the match over it. But then the other one,
The fun mode.
the non-modesty mode. There's
That's
just
the
like
modesty mode.
There's just like two little squares that are big enough for the smallest font to have like a 3 and a 0 in there. It was like 3x5 font or something.
It was a
like
3x5. Yeah, it was just teeny tiny.
Yeah, that was the teeniest, tiniest thing that we could use to make numbers and letters on the dot matrix display.
You're welcome.
And so if you find one of those games, and you know the operator, you can get them to maybe change that setting. But it was really a hoot, and it was really edgy. And I think one edgy thing that people don't know about Guns N' Roses is that, and I was kind of disappointed because our initials were always the default high score initials, but on Guns N' Roses, Slash had another idea. So we had initial codes that didn't have anything to do with the designers, and Do you know what they were?
MDT.
Like, yes, there was one that was MDT, which, and we asked, so Slash gave us these list of initials. He's like, MDT. We're like, what does that stand for? He's like, oh, mother-daughter team. So obviously Slash lived a little bit more exciting life than we did.
He was not what I was expecting, though. We had drinks with him and hung out, but he was like this really soft-spoken, kind of quiet, introverted kind of guy.
Yeah, and here he is with the nose ring and the hair over his face, and he's like pushing Joe Kamenko's little 5-year-old daughter on the swing, and they're like,
it was so cute.
Oh, Slash, can you come see my room?
Yeah, and Kirk did these super awesome flaming letters for the score, and he was there playing. He was like, cool.
Yeah, and
he was really quiet.
The first
Nice
thing,
guy.
the first thing that I ever did at Data East was that after I'd been hired, so I interviewed the third weekend in November, and my family was from Chicago, so I went back and was there, and so I was there over Thanksgiving, and Slash came in because I think his wife's family was from Chicago, so she was there, and they had this design meeting that was on the Friday night after Thanksgiving. So they were there, and Slash and Neil Falconer and John Borg, all these guys were chain smoking Marlboros, and they're up in this upstairs conference room. And so my first job there was to go out and buy pizza and Jack Daniels, so that Slash could have a bottle of Jack. And we went out, got some pizza down at this Italian restaurant Sorrento's, which unfortunately closed last year.
Oh,
but this was
that place was so good.
It was great. It was a buffet. We designed I don't know how many games writing on the paper tablecloths there.
Wow.
I'm sure it was owned by the mob. It was just one of those places. And those places are going away, but yeah. So we did guns, and then we went on to the next game, which was Maverick. And I've got a picture of this, but you can see it here. That this is the example of one of the kind of things that we had to do to keep the damn pinball factory running. So we made this nice, molded boat with all these little pieces, and we had decals to go on it to fill it in and have all the windows. There was all this detail, and we're getting ready to ship out our sample games, and the damn decals hadn't come in yet. And we had to ship these games because we had to get them to Europe, get them on the boat. It was September. The movie was coming out. So Scott actually painted this prototype boat. He had to paint 75 of them, and it was in a week.
Wow.
So he's like,
it was a blur.
We're like, get off the dots. You got to airbrush these damn things.
Yeah, this was
so that we could ship these games, and and then the decals came in, and there were a few left over. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to put that in my office in case I ever get a Maverick. And I actually do have a Maverick game. I've got 35 games in my collection now.
You have 35?
I do. Plus a 50 Shuffle Alley and some other assorted stuff. 35 pinballs.
Wow.
But so I was going to put this on the game, but I hadn't put it on yet.
You want to sign it?
Yeah, that might not be a bad idea.
Yeah.
Because 35 all in one basement.
Jeez.
Walkout basement.
It's all basement.
So my wife gets the rest of the house. That's why we picked it out. So
yeah, you've really went nuts with the man cave concept.
The man pit is what it's been referred to because maybe there's 35 games, but maybe there's really room for 30.
There you go.
So, it's,
So,
Please.
But the other thing that happened with Maverick was that Scott actually got his
My nickname.
his nickname that was when you had a mustache.
Oh man, yes.
Yeah, a real
Village people kind of looking.
a serious one.
Yeah.
But so this sort of came out that if
was so funny.
if you go and play Lethal Weapon or the first Star Wars, you can see that screen that says Lyddon Anderson .Madness, which was Jack Lyddon and Kurt Anderson,
Yep.
who were
My
really
first art director.
Yeah, I mean, two of the greatest dot artists in pinball history. That they were really the first ones to do dots for that size dot matrix display, and even the smaller display back when they were, the dots for
That
Star
Jurassic
Trek and
Park
Batman.
animation where the T-Rex is running and chasing. I mean,
Running and
it's
chasing
amazing.
and eating a goat.
Yes.
And they
32
started
pixels
out
tall.
even before Deluxe Paint that before that tool came into play, like Checkpoint,
Graph paper,
Batman,
right?
they were doing it on graph paper. That's how the animations were done. That
Weren't
they
they
would
like
take a piece of graph paper and
brute
they draw this
force?
one, draw this one, draw this one, and then they get into a program and they type in ones and zeros with
Jesus, I remember.
000111100, lowercase b, comma, then the next byte, then the next byte.
Wow.
And when these guys converted the art out of Deluxe Paint, that's what we got.
You made that nice offset system, though, with the green dot.
Yep. Oh gosh, I'd forgotten about that shit.
What a revelation.
Oh man, the green
Yeah, actually,
dot.
no, Orin did some really cool programming. I mean, you actually were getting like Adobe After Effects style compositing going on. I mean, you could actually have layers going on.
Yeah, we
It was
could
like,
have
that
up
had
to-
Z-depth.
Yeah, we could have
wild.
up to 30 or 32 different objects on the screen that we'd be manipulating.
Yeah.
That the Williams guys did it differently. They just would do full page animations
They're just
and just sort
blitting.
of blap them out and
Yeah.
do page. So they
Compositing
had wonderful
effects.
animations, but
Yeah.
if you think of like multi-ball start, it's going to be exactly the same every time.
And I think you described it to me as using sprites, so you
Yeah.
could do a lot more on the screen at a
Yep.
time, right?
And we could have them be masked too, so that
That's
when
right.
so they wouldn't just do the 70% layer and the 30% layer, and those would add up to make 100%. That they would have to do a mask on it too, so that it could move over it and have a black border. So if you had
It was so worth it.
a dinosaur moving across a background, that it would blank out those pixels and the background wouldn't bleed through. And it's amazing that they could do stuff with 3 shades and 128 by 32.
I actually ended up working in that scale when I moved to here. I did dot matrix animations for like 6.5 years here in Atlanta for the. Has anyone taken MARTA recently? The next train information, the typeface.
Yeah, and it wasn't a font that you got from Deluxe Paint either.
No, it might have been. It might have well has been. I was like 8 pixels by 3 or something.
That was
crazy.
Always, That was always the biggest tease that because they would make fonts that I think at one point in our system we had 60 or 70 different fonts on the display. Mm-hmm. And the biggest joke would be, "Oh, did you get that font right from Deluxe Paint Animate?"
After we spent a week making it.
And Scott, you're actually brought back in a bit for some Stern machines over the last few years, like Star Trek.
Yes. That was a weird
Metallica.
phone call. Yeah. Was it? Yeah. My old art director reached out to me out of nowhere and said, "Hey, we're kind of putting the band back together. They're going to hire a bunch of freelancers to do dot matrix stuff, and now it's the age of the internet, and I was just able to email them frames from my house. I did it all in After Effects, and it was neat.
Yeah.
Get back into it, and I've got like a total of 3-4 years doing pinball stuff.
Yeah, you got a nice long credit list. Yeah, and that was how after I moved to North Carolina, back to where I went to college, got married, and all that. That I actually worked on Stryker and NFL and Playboy. That was a really interesting time for the industry because it was right around the time that Williams went bust, and guys like Dwight Sullivan and Keith Johnson went to work at Stern, but they hadn't learned the systems yet, so they brought me back into Moonlight. And Playboy, which we did with the George Gomez game that I did with Dwight and Lonnie Ropp, was interesting because Lonnie worked days, so he programmed display like 9 to 5 Central Time. Then each night he would email me the code, and I would get some art from Mark Alves, who was doing the art then. And so I would work on it from like 7 to 11 or 12 Eastern Time till midnight, and then I'd email it back to him, and then he would just pick up from where it was. So it was like we had this East Coast second shift to do Playboy. And, we got it done in a lot of time. And I was used to cranking out stuff fast too. That we lost some people, when things took the downturn. That Sega didn't have very much money to keep us running. Once they realized that we weren't going to be making very many games, so I ended up doing 4 games a year. That we had 2 programmers, Neil Falconer and Lonnie Ropp, So they would each have six. So they would each do 2 games a year. So Neil would start a game in January, and Lonnie would start a game in April. They would work for 6 months, but I would bop between the two of them and program all the dot art, that these guys did, and I got to be not trying to still be modest here, but I got to be so good at it that I could really do it in about a month. So I really got more involved in doing rules and speech scripts and stuff like that, because those guys were real busy trying to crank out the code, because for them 6 months maybe wasn't enough time, with all the things that they had to do, that it wasn't just putting in the game rules for a brand new game, but it was doing things like light shows and syncing up sound effects, and all the choreography, balancing the scores, trying to make it fun. There were some games where we had more time to make it fun than others.
So speaking to that, with regard to the rules, because code and stuff is such a big thing these days with pinball machines. I mean, the mechanics stay the same, but you can really change the game by the rule set. How involved were you with rules and, like you said, syncing the light shows and whatnot? Like, let's say even creating rules, or I guess making them happen as they roll out.
So there were a lot of times when those guys would just say, hey, Orin, knock yourself out, and I would write the rule set and they would just program it. So they would make tweaks. They were way more experienced at it than I was. Lonnie wrote some of the code on Laser War when he was working at Incredible Technologies. He didn't move over to full-time pinball until like Lethal Weapon.
Did you say Laser Ball?
Laser War.
Laser War?
Laser War.
Laser War? What?
So all of us at Data East had one of these jackets. It was very, very 80s. And what they would do,
I'm not putting it on.
What they would do was, you could tell how long you were there, that they would add do another patch for each game. But if you started there in the middle, they would basically give you a jacket that had like 5 or 6 old patches sewn on it. So I've got
Laser War Nitro 87.
Intro. 87.
Oh, intro. Okay.
Yeah, so that was the first.
That makes a little more sense.
That was the first Data East game.
Okay, that's cool.
It was nice that Data East really followed in the original Stern's footsteps. That the original Stern made boards that were compatible with the Bally games. That you could use a Bally board to fix a Stern game, but you couldn't use a Stern board to fix a Bally game. And Data East did the same thing. That you could use it to you could use that Data East board. You could use a Williams System 11 board in the Data East game, but you couldn't put the Data East board into a Williams game. So it was like, sort of the old thing with the enemy, like, let's design guns that can shoot our enemy's bullets, but our bullets don't fit in the enemy's guns.
Okay.
So
speaking of the coding, then how, obviously tournament play, at least as far as I can see it, has really blossomed in the last, 8 years, maybe 10, certainly to more folks. Did you guys consider much of that when you were writing code and back, the early to mid 90s, and how did that roll out?
Yeah, we always did that. If you look at those old Data East games, they had tournament mode that had like separate adjustments where it was not just tournament mode on or off, but it was tournament mode Expo, Papa, or IFPA. So because all those tournaments had different rules at that time. I mean, we're talking about the days of like Papa 4, talking about IFPA 1, which I think was in Wisconsin, and of course Expo in Chicago was still going strong then. So we would basically put in those adjustments, and it was always really important for Expo because it was always the brand new game that was the tournament game, either out on the floor or in the finals. That, of course, that back then it was that Premier was still going strong. Williams had bought Bally, taken over them, so they would get a slot. And then Capcom came along. Alvin G was there. There was one year where Mystery Castle was the tournament game. It's the most Mystery Castles you would have ever seen in one room at one time, probably including their factory.
Ouch. Actually, when I started, there was Data East, Bally, Williams, Alvin G, Premier.
Yeah, so there are 5 pinball companies, and then Capcom came along around the time Premier went down, and we had, at Data East, we had a lot of ex-Bally people that sort of got left behind when Williams bought out Bally and brought them in. there's some people made that transition, like Ward Pemberton, but most people got laid off. So we had a VP of purchasing who had 3 diamonds in his bally ring since he had been there since 1960.
Wow.
Jim Ross, whose name probably nobody here has heard except for Scott. But we had some really good guys that were pinball lifers. Don Thorne, who was in our factory, who came to Data East from the old Stern, and he came to Stern when Stern bought Chicago Coin, which was mechanical pinball manufacturer, and that's how Stern got into pinball, was they bought that pinball line, back in the days when they were making games like Berserk and Scramble and stuff like that. We got one more Baywatch, don't we?
Whoops.
Oops. Uh-oh.
You're going backwards. Are you right
Hit the
clicking?
left one. There you go.
So, so this is my buddy Yasmin Bleeth, and I've actually got this necktie. We all had Baywatch neckties that we wore out to the trade show in Reno when we did Baywatch. I think that was at the same time. I think Williams at that show. Williams had No Fear, and Premier had Stargate. So it was a pretty good pinball show.
Yeah.
It was in Reno, and so dear old Yasmin signed my tie, and she asked me if she was actually the girl on the tie, and I said, yeah, I think we actually did model that after. She's like, wow, my boobs look great. You did a really good job on the game. And it was funny because all the pictures were very realistic and lifelike, because Marcus Rothkranz, the guy who was doing all our back glasses, had sort of this photorealistic method of doing art. Would you call it photorealistic?
You draw them naked first and then the clothes.
Well, no, he actually would get the source art and he would mock it up by cutting it out and then enlarging it or shrinking it in a photocopier.
Oh, yeah.
That was in his living room in his house in Burbank.
Yeah.
And basically paste it up, and then he would paint over the photocopies. And that would be his back glass, which was interesting. I don't know that I would have done it that way, but he was really good. He's out in Las Vegas now, and he sells health food, so you can find him, Marcus Rothkranz. You can find him on Facebook, like most people that are selling something.
So what do you guys think of the mods, things like Color DMD? I think Baywatch, the giant 6-player Baywatch, has Color DMD, and then some of the code bugs or maybe ways to balance things out that maybe weren't fleshed out before it came out to the public. Any thoughts there on?
Yeah, it's interesting. I know that there's one guy that's done some of these. There's one guy that's done some of the mods where he's gone into the code and changed this bit or that bit. The guy who made sure that the first mode in Jurassic Park wasn't always Stampede.
And these are new ROMs, right? They have to burn new ROMs and send them, or how does that work?
So, well, he sort of did that, I guess, outside of the current Stern group. So, went into the code and maybe changed a bit for scoring, so something scored more or less or something like that. Maybe it's balancing. We made Stampede that first mode on purpose. It's just like how on Addams Family, the first mode is always one of 2 fast scoring modes, unless you hit the pops and change it. But, for players like you guys, you're going to get more than one mode anyway, so what does it matter that it's not the first one? What does it matter if it's the first one or not? You're going to see more than one, and you can start as many concurrent modes in Jurassic as you want until you get to the 2-ball. So, it's not like you couldn't start Stampede, catch the ball, shoot the ramp, have it come back down over the end lane and shoot it back in there, and then you've got something else going. So,
So some, would you call that an exploit, or just the way you guys coded it to make it pretty exciting, I guess, right? To stack modes, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a fun mode for somebody who, was probably only going to get one mode per game and only shoot the scoop at most one mode. That it was exciting. It had fast music. That, of course, we had the BSMT chip, which was total MIDI, so you could speed up the music at will, so to get faster and faster and faster and sort of have that sense of urgency. and it was there for players to enjoy. So does that work in a home setting? Maybe not, but and it's something I've talked with some of the people at Stern now about, that if we want to have things like that in there, maybe the thing to do is to go back and do some new code and put things in there as an adjustment, so you can turn that on and off, just a software adjustment with all the rest of them. So who knows what we might see. There's a lot of stuff in those games. There's at least 3 games that I programmed that have hidden video modes that nobody has found.
Are they accessible through normal play or flipper combinations?
Normal play.
Wow.
With maybe a little bit of flipper stuff. So, but one of the things that'd be nice is to make those a little bit more accessible, because after 25 years, that might be nice for them to see the light of day.
Maybe that'll happen.
So what else do we have here? We got any more good slides here? Or are we ready for questions? So, Cut the Cheese. Who's played Cut the Cheese? So, probably a lot of you guys don't know that we did a lot of novelty games, as well as the pinball games. That was one reason that Sega wanted us, because they had seen that we had brought some games that we'd done under the Data East USA brand to trade shows. I think as a joke, there's
Cut the Cheese.
I think as a joke, there's a promo for the next game coming soon, Carousel in Guns N' Roses, in the track mode.
Oh yeah, we did this.
We did this game, Carousel.
What was that genre of game called?
This was a ball roll down, a little bit,
yes,
where it had a spinning carousel, and you had to get the ball into the right hole. It was sort of like a roulette. Something like that. But Paul Ferris actually did the art for it, and like most games,
Shelley did a little too. Yeah.
Yep. And like most games, there were people from his family on the backlash, just like him and his wife on Paragon, or his brother and sister-in-law on Future Spa, both games of which I have in my basement next to Twister, which Paul also did the art for.
He was so good.
Paul was great, and we also worked with his brother, his son.
Yeah, Todd came and worked with us.
Todd and Brad Ferris both worked at Data East and Sega, working on video games and pinball machines. And of course, I had to say to Todd, "Is that really your mom on the Backlash of Paragon?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Man, she was hot."
Thanks, Orin.
So cut the cheese notwithstanding. Did you guys deal directly, or obviously with Slash and stuff, but with the license holders? And was that a pain, or did someone else run that to ground? Because you guys really hit a lot of really big movies and big licenses at the time with X-Files, Starship Troopers, Apollo 13, things like that.
We had more licenses than we could do at one point, and that's why things like South Park and X-Files got really delayed. Because we got X-Files after their first season, and we didn't put it out till after the 4th. We got South Park during the first season, and didn't put it out till the 3rd. And it was interesting what we did with licenses. That it was, some companies were easy to work with, some weren't. We said we were never going to do a Disney game, and it didn't happen till Pirates. Of course, now they work with Disney all the time, but I think Disney's more comfortable with interactive stuff too. Warner Brothers was one of the ones that was harder to work with. We worked with them on Maverick, and we worked with Fox and Universal a lot after that.
Okay.
So we had trouble with likenesses, we had trouble with voices, we had to send out a new version of Maverick ROMs because Graham Greene's voice was in it as the Indian who says, "Dogo, dogo, dogo, dogo." And they found out, and we basically had to internationally send new sets of sound ROMs to get his voice out and have it replaced with Brian Schmidt going, "Ooh, doo, doo, doo." So it was like the mode start, so it was in there a lot.
And Tom Hanks had his face covered or whatever. The guy behind the helmet or whatever.
A lot of them didn't want their faces in the dots.
Yeah. Well, Tom was an interesting story that he didn't want his face on the game because he didn't do licensing. And we tried to convince him for Apollo 13, and he wouldn't. So the voice parts for Tom Hanks I actually did in the game. There's 2 of them. And we mostly used... where are we? So there I am with Kevin Bacon. So you guys now can claim fewer degrees of separation.
1 degree of
Kevin
separation.
Bacon than
wow.
most people.
2.
And the interesting thing is that Bill Paxton took that picture
Oh, neat.
because Bill and Tom and Kevin came to Oprah. So that's backstage at Oprah. They did an Oprah show about Apollo 13. And of course, we were 10 minutes from Oprah's studio. So they came down and did it, and I think that Borgie and Joe Kamikow and Brian Schmidt were actually on the show, and then Lonnie Ropp and I were back in the back room at Oprah shooting baskets. Actually, it was like a huge warehouse, and there's a basketball hoop. So we just shot baskets while they were filming the program, and then came back. Kevin came back. He did some voice recordings. We didn't do Bill then. I think we picked up Bill we picked up Bill's stuff later, and also did some of the Twister stuff at the same time. But Gary Sinise was there too, and he was absolutely great. And he ended up doing most of the speech for that game because we knew we weren't going to get Tom. And then the funny thing about Tom, who doesn't do licensing, he actually bought 6 of the Apollo 13 games. And then he, 3 months later, he did a Lego deal. So
A Lego deal for Apollo 13?
for licensing,
Wow.
license
Okay.
deal. So
So
Anyway.
Tom Hanks Lego sets out there?
yeah, so we even got as far to we knew somebody who was his jogging buddy who asked him, and he still said no. So guess he, that was one of those 2 other degrees of separation, not through Kevin, but we did our best. What can we do?
And I'm not sure what there is to this, but like a year or so ago, you and Joe Kamikow were talking a lot about, or you were working with them, I think, on Batman 66 a bit.
Oh yeah.
Speak to that, because that's
There's 94,
that's really
yeah.
grown some.
And I've got all this
legs.
stuff up here too, if you guys want to see it. But
Oh yeah, that too. We got to go back to.
we'll go back to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was funny. Originally, what the Batman 66 game was going to be a 30th anniversary of Data East, Stern, stuff like that. So it was going to be a game where lots of people were going to come back and work on it, sort of like a reunion game. And then the timeline got compressed. So I was supposed to write some code for it. It never happened. So I got involved with helping out Joe with marketing and stuff like that. If you guys went to Expo, there were like some survey cards. We did an online survey. What do you want to see as the next game from Kapow Pinball after Batman? It had a bunch of choices, but it was actually funny that their photographer was overworked doing these special photos with the super limited edition. So I actually ended up taking all of the photos of Adam with other people, while the other guy was printing out the 5x7s.
Oh, wow.
So I can't, I met lots of Hollywood people. Some of them were really nice, like Kevin Bacon and Gary Sinise. Some other ones were jerks, but Adam was really the best of them all. That he spent all morning signing autographs on Topps cards that ship with those games. So this was about 4 PM, and he'd been going strong since 9 AM. And he's not a young guy.
He's
Or
Batman.
He wasn't. Yeah, I mean he was. He was laughing. He was signing stuff, even though his agent said he wasn't supposed to because he wasn't getting paid for it. And we had a blast that weekend. And he got to play the game, which is good. It's too bad he didn't get to see it finished, but hopefully we'll all live long enough to see it finished.
That's a good one.
So
It's close, I think.
Yeah, and it's funny that Kapow is going to make another game. They asked me to program it. I said no, I'm washed up and I have a family. Get somebody else to program it.
So that means you can tell us what it is.
So no,
No.
because I still have a non-disclosure.
Fair enough.
But
to back
wanna
up
go
to,
back?
That one right there.
So,
the brake bug and
so yeah, I actually was in the display on Starship Troopers twice. If you guys have ever done the card matching mode on Starship
Is that you?
Troopers, that is actually me. I'm actually the Joker bug that you have to step through 52 cards before you get to the Joker. But that was a mode that I came up with, that card matching, and I said, if there's 52 cards, 53 cards, that That's way less than the 3% that we give for a special. We could go ahead and just make this be a fair bet that if you pick the right one, you get a special. And I've gotten it. I've gotten it before, so we don't rig it. So that's the brain bug. Like all of these things that are up here, these are like first prototype things. So like this head, we made a whole bunch of these heads from ID4, and this one's made out of some urethane, 36XXX urethane. So we made a whole bunch of these, and then we put them in front. We made this pinball test fixture where there were like 10 lanes that had a shooter at the bottom and a ball, and we just let it run for 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 cycles, and see which head would break first, and see which one would break last. And the one we broke last, that's the one that we made it out of.
Mm-hmm. And that one's split in half in the game, right?
Yeah,
so it doesn't help it any.
Oh, it would pop open.
Yeah. In fact, so. But that was it wasn't necessarily to see if the little tip parts would break off. We knew that would happen no matter what we used, unless we made it out of metal, in which case you'd have a ball that would be rolling around like the Death Star and digging a hole in your playfield. But yeah, we had some great guys that some great vendors that were willing to explore all sorts of different materials, and but it was, we made all sorts of toys like Apollo 13, the LEM, the rocket, whatever.
And we didn't have 3D printers either.
Oh, no.
Actually, there was no graphic software that would be affordable either.
But those toys didn't.
It was like done with clay.
Those toys didn't interact with the ball like this, so we had to figure out something a little bit different of, here's going to be this molded piece. It's going to split in half. It's going to look really cool. We're going to paint it. And, the ball's going to be hitting it 20 or 30 times per game.
Well, the X-File cabinet is pretty clever. I mean, I guess it's not... I guess you have to hit it to open it, and then it raises up out of
that it drops down, and, so this was one of the prototype materials that we made it out of, and it's not, it's not cut out. The door, if you've seen one of these that still has the drawer in it, that it, hit the drawer and it's hinged and it opens up. But, so you hit the bottom drawer, then it goes down a step. You hit the middle drawer, it goes down a step. You hit here, and, it's just hinged so it goes in, and there's a little hole in the side, not cut out here, where the ball comes out. Then a hole in here so you can have the two lights that come out of the top. But it was a really neat gag. It wasn't all that much money.
That's clever.
And, it was like, well, what do you think about with the X-Files? Well, there's the file cabinet. And, man, Fox was shitty to work on that game. That was really, X-Files was really the curse of us getting too much licenses, because by the time we did it, it had gotten too popular. And before we were talking to Chris Carter, there were 5 layers between him and us. So we had people saying, well, every time they say something in the pinball machine, it needs to be something that they would have said for real in an episode. And you have to have it line up with the episodes so that, they wouldn't be saying anything out of context. So, so if you get an extra ball or replay in a jackpot in X-Files, you're going to hear because you're not going to, because, Dana Scully never would have said extra ball.
Fox might have.
So he might have, he went on to plenty of extra balls in his subsequent career.
That's right, Californication.
That's right, exactly. So, but, by and large, when we could work with people, they were really good. There were some people that were harder to work with. Probably one of the best people that we worked with was Jan DeVant, because Starship Troopers and Twister. And man, he was really good. He directed our sound session with the actors reading my speech script for Twister. Wow. And that game turned out really well sound-wise, I think.
And I did see there is one on the floor tonight. That's the only one I can remember, if anyone remembers any other Sega or Dad East machines. But Twister's out there for sure. And we're actually really running short on time, so let's open it up if there's any questions out there for Orin or Scott.
We both worked on Tattoo Assassins also.
That's right, the flaming diarrhea spray.
Is that here?
Of Tattoo Assassins.
Burger Time?
Oh gosh.
We'll have to play Burger Time if we want to get
have to play that instead.
Yep.
So there's a couple things in that regard. So Joe Kamikow, who was VP of engineering and did also VP of licensing for Sega and Data East, he Shelley Sachs and Gary Stern started Data East with the Japanese money. So Joe, around the time that I left, he went out. He left Sega too, and had two very successful stints at IGT. He brought IGT all their licensed titles. And they were cranking out licensed titles like crazy. They had done Wheel of Fortune, but they hadn't done really big licensing. So, you see slots like Sinatra and all those other ones. He did that. He later went on, started a company called Spooky Cool Games, not to be confused with Spooky Pinball, which was bought by Zynga. So a lot of the good Zynga video slots come from him. But we tried the tournament pinball stuff. We tried the Kelly Packard's Golden Q, but it wasn't random enough to have a licensed pinball game. IGT did some slots called Pinball that had pinball toppers, but they didn't do anything. But probably the closest is, and gosh, I wish I had my phone hooked up to here, but they've done a series of Cleopatra games and some other games, and you can go see them at Bellagio, where there is a bonus mode that is pinball, and you can win money playing the video pinball. Now, of course, there's a time when the ball gets faster and faster. But there was one, I think, where I won $54 in the bonus game playing pinball. Now,
you have made some money in pinball.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
But, you can't say, better than D Division and Pinburg. But I can't say that $54 was the maximum that I could have won there. And I'm sure that if I had played like crap, I probably could have won $3. But it seemed like until the ball got to be warp speed, it had fair physics and stuff like that. So digitally they've done it. And that game was a lot of fun to play. But other than that, it's games like we tried to do some novelty pinball, Roach Racers and Derby Days. I don't know if you guys have seen those or not. You can look them up on IPDB. They were rare one-ofs. They used the King Kong flippers. It was continuous multi-ball, and it was basically sort of a riff on Hay Burners or some of the other mechanical horsey games, where you had to there was a horse that was yours. You had to shoot the targets to advance that horse, and if you could win 3 games in a row, you'd get a decent size, 500 ticket jackpot or something like that. So it was a pinball game, but it was not in a pinball cabinet. It was a novelty cabinet, so it had sides all the way down to the ground, so you couldn't shake it. So I think Mike Pasak has the Roach Racers. I have the playfield for Derby Days and the back glass at home.
Cool.
So, but not the parts to build it, but that's okay because nobody wants to play 6-ball multi-ball with King Kong size flippers. That'd be like somebody thinking of putting 13 balls in the game. Who would have thought of that, Scott?
I would have thought of that.
I was gone at that.
That was at the Baywatch show that I actually thought of the 13 balls, and I probably had too much to drink. But when we woke up in the morning, we thought it was still a good idea.
By God, we're doing it!
Yeah, that's right.
13-ball multi-balls were fun.
Orin, Scott, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Orin, I know tomorrow we'll be having another seminar. I think it'll be focused more on maybe the actual programming side.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about code and secret stuff.
Yeah. So maybe some good stuff there. And if you don't mind, if I'm speaking out of turn, let me know. But if you guys want to come up and take a look at these little gems, please come on up.
Come take a look. Handle these things. These are all like first prototype Apollo 13 limb and the early boat. What the X-Files file cabinet really looks like before you cut the pieces off, and then the brain bug that I'm glad there's nobody under 18 here.
We need a little Doogie Howser to put there.
That's right, a little Doogie. Let's capture the brain bug.
One other thing, too, if you guys haven't seen it yet, the SFGE app is really handy to know, again, when his session is tomorrow and everything else that's going on. So be sure to go ahead and download that if you can, and check out the Marco booth inside, as well as Project Pinball. There's a lot of good things in there for the pinheads here this weekend.
Yeah, Marco people are good.
Yep. So again, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We crushed it.
We did.